the warning that changed everything. The crystalline dome of the Galactic Assembly shimmered under the light of 3 distant suns, casting rainbow patterns across the vast chamber below. Representatives from 42 different species occupied the circular seating arrangement, their forms as diverse as the stars themselves. Some breathed oxygen, others methane. Some stood on 2 legs, others on 6, and a few floated in specialized containment fields. But today they all shared one thing in common: confusion about why they had been summoned on such short notice. Ambassador Gentar of the Valkyrie stood in the central speaking platform, his silvery skin reflecting the ambient light in waves that betrayed his emotional state. The Valkyrie were known throughout the galaxy as exceptional diplomats and explorers, their long lives giving them patience that other species could only dream of. Gentar himself had served the Assembly for over 3 centuries, and in all that time, he had never called an emergency session. Until today. The chamber's acoustics carried his voice to every corner without need for artificial amplification. His words came slowly, carefully chosen, as members of the Assembly settled into their seats and brought their attention to the speaker. The murmuring died down, replaced by an expectant silence that pressed against Gentar like a physical weight. He could feel thousands of eyes in all their various forms fixed upon him. Some watched with curiosity, others with impatience, but all waited to hear what could possibly be so urgent. Gentar activated the holographic projector embedded in the platform. A 3-dimensional image materialized above him, showing a small yellow star on the outer edge of the galaxy's 3rd arm. The star looked unremarkable, just another point of light among trillions. But as the image zoomed closer, a blue and green planet came into focus, its surface a mixture of continents and oceans that seemed to glow with life. "Honored delegates," Gentar began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. 3 cycles ago, our deep space exploration vessel, the Wandering Light, completed its survey of Sector 789. In that region, we discovered what we initially believed to be another routine first contact opportunity. A species in the early stages of space exploration, confined to their home system, showing all the typical signs of a developing civilization ready to join the galactic community. Counselor Thex of the Regelian Commerce Guild leaned forward in her seat, her 4 arms gesturing with interest. "A new species is always welcome news, Ambassador. Why the emergency session? Surely standard first contact protocols would suffice." Her tone was pleasant, almost cheerful. New species meant new markets, new resources, new opportunities for trade. The Rigelians had built their fortune on being the first to establish commercial relationships with emerging civilizations. Gentar's skin rippled with darker shades of silver, a sign of distress that any Valkyrie would recognize instantly. "I wish it were that simple, Counselor. The species calls themselves humans and their world is named Earth. What we discovered about them has kept me awake for 30 consecutive cycles. I stand before you today not to celebrate a new addition to our community, but to issue the most serious warning of my entire career." The mood in the chamber shifted perceptibly. Ambassador Gentar was not known for dramatics or exaggeration. His reputation had been built on measured responses and careful analysis. If he was this disturbed, there had to be a genuine reason. The holographic display changed to show images of human cities, sprawling metropolises with towering structures of glass and steel. Vehicles moved along intricate road systems, and millions of lights twinkled across the night side of the planet like a blanket of stars brought down to Earth. "Earth's dominant species has achieved remarkable things," Gentar continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that came from centuries of experience. "They have split the atom, mapped their genome, sent primitive vessels beyond their solar system, and even set foot on their moon. Their technology, while behind our own, shows innovation and creativity. Their art and culture display depth and complexity. By every standard measure, they appear to be exactly what they seem, a young species taking its first steps into a larger universe." Commander Croth of the Zormak Dominion rose from his seat with a dismissive snort. The massive warrior stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body covered in thick, armored plates that had evolved over millions of years on a high-gravity world. His species had conquered 16 star systems through military might, and their navy was considered second only to the ancient Eldest Confederation in terms of raw power. "Then what is the problem, Ambassador? Your tone suggests danger, but your words describe opportunity. A primitive species with resources and technology we could easily acquire or guide. The Dominion would be happy to bring them into our sphere of influence." The suggestion drew murmurs of agreement from several delegates. The Zormak approach to diplomacy was well known: join us willingly or be absorbed by force. They had been reprimanded by the assembly countless times, but their military strength made direct intervention problematic. As long as they targeted non-member species, the assembly could do little but express disapproval. Juntar's skin flashed with sudden dark patterns, a visual representation of anger that made several nearby delegates lean back in surprise. You do not understand, Commander? None of you do. That is why I called this session. The danger does not come from human technology or resources. It comes from something far more fundamental to their nature. He paused, letting the silence build before continuing. Humans have been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history. Over 5,000 years of continuous conflict. They have never known true peace, not even for a single generation. The chamber erupted in confused voices. War was not uncommon among developing species. Most civilizations went through violent periods before achieving the social maturity needed for peaceful coexistence. But 5,000 years seemed excessive, even by the standards of the most aggressive species known to the Assembly. Senator Vix of the Harmonious Collective raised a tentacle in question. His species had evolved from hive-minded organisms and found the concept of interspecies conflict almost incomprehensible. Surely, Ambassador, you exaggerate? How could any species survive such prolonged conflict? They would destroy themselves long before achieving space flight. That is precisely what makes them so terrifying, Juntar replied, his voice dropping to almost a whisper that somehow carried through the entire chamber. They do not destroy themselves. They adapt. They learn. They improve. Every conflict makes them stronger, smarter, more efficient at waging war. It is not a flaw in their development. It is their core evolutionary strategy. The holographic display changed again, this time showing scenes from human history. Ancient warriors in bronze armor clashing on dusty plains. Medieval knights charging across muddy fields with lowered lances. Soldiers in trenches firing primitive chemical propellant weapons. Modern militaries with sophisticated equipment conducting operations with surgical precision. And finally, the mushroom clouds of nuclear detonations, terrible flowers of destruction that could end civilizations. They have weaponized everything, Juntar continued, his voice filled with a mixture of horror and grudging admiration. Fire, metal, chemicals, diseases, radiation, information, even their own psychology. They study war the way we study art. They have institutions dedicated entirely to military strategy. They analyze every battle they have ever fought, extracting lessons from both victory and defeat. They write treatises on tactics that are thousands of years old and still considered relevant today. The display showed images of human military academies, where young humans studied the art of warfare. Libraries filled with books on strategy and tactics. Simulation centers where commanders practiced battles that had never occurred, exploring hypothetical scenarios to prepare for conflicts that might never happen. War games that turned combat into mathematics, calculating optimal strategies with cold precision. But most disturbing of all, Juntar said, his skin now a deep, troubled gray, is their concept of total war. When humans fight, they do not simply seek to defeat their enemies. They seek to utterly destroy their opponent's ability to continue fighting. They target not just military assets but economic infrastructure, industrial capacity, even civilian morale. They understand warfare as a holistic system, and they know exactly how to dismantle that system piece by piece. Commander Croft laughed, a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. Ambassador, you speak as if these humans are monsters, but everything you describe is simply efficient military doctrine. The Zormak Dominion employs similar strategies. This is how wars are won. If anything, these humans sound like kindred spirits. Juntar turned to face the commander directly, his eyes meeting the warrior's gaze without flinching. Commander Croft, during my time on Earth, I had the privilege of meeting with their military leadership. I asked them a hypothetical question. What would happen if an alien species attacked their world? Do you know what they told me? The chamber fell silent, every delegate waiting for the answer. They said they would not simply defend their planet. They said they would hunt down every ship, every station, every world that belonged to their attackers. They would systematically dismantle their enemy's entire civilization, pursuing them across the galaxy if necessary, until nothing remained but ashes and regret. And then, Commander, they smiled. Not with joy or cruelty, but with the absolute certainty of beings who have spent 5,000 years perfecting the art of war. The silence that followed was profound. Even Commander Croft seemed momentarily speechless, his armored plates shifting as he processed this information. Other delegates exchanged worried glances, their initial curiosity now replaced with genuine concern. Counselor Thek spoke again, her voice less cheerful than before. Surely the Assembly could establish diplomatic relations with these humans? If they are as intelligent as you suggest, they must be capable of reason. Perhaps membership in the galactic community would temper their aggressive tendencies. That was my hope as well, Jintar admitted. And I believe it is possible. Humans are not mindless killers. They are capable of great compassion, remarkable creativity, and profound wisdom. But they must be approached with respect and caution. Any species that views them as weak or easy prey will pay a terrible price. That is why I called this emergency session. To ensure that we, as a collective body, understand what we are dealing with before someone makes a catastrophic mistake. Commander Croft stood again, his posture radiating confidence despite Jintar's warnings. With all due respect, Ambassador, I believe you have allowed fear to cloud your judgment. Yes, humans sound like formidable warriors for a primitive species. But they are still primitive. They have not faced true military might. They have only fought themselves, other humans with equal technology and limited resources. The Zormak Dominion has conquered species far more advanced than these humans. I see no reason for concern. Jintar's skin flashed with urgent patterns. Commander, I am begging you to reconsider. Do not make the mistake of confusing technological superiority with guaranteed victory. Humans have a saying, it is not the size of the dog in the fight but the size of the fight in the dog. They have spent millennia learning how to win wars they should have lost. They specialize in turning disadvantages into advantages. They thrive under pressure that would break other species. But Croth was already walking toward the exit, his heavy footsteps echoing through the chamber. Thank you for the cultural lesson, Ambassador. But the Dominion does not cower from challenges. Earth sits in an unclaimed sector, rich in resources that could benefit my people. If the Assembly is too frightened to make first contact, then the Zormak will do so on our own terms. Perhaps these humans will appreciate dealing with a species that understands strength. Several other delegates stood, following Crotha's lead. The Dominion had allies and trading partners who saw opportunity where Jintar saw danger. Within minutes, nearly a third of the Assembly had left the chamber, their minds already turning to the potential benefits of bringing Earth under their control or influence. Jintar watched them go with a growing sense of dread. He had failed. His warning had not been enough. Now all he could do was watch as events unfolded and hope that the price of ignoring his advice would not be too high. But deep in his heart, the old ambassador knew better. The galaxy was about to learn a lesson about humanity that he prayed would not come at the cost of countless lives. As the remaining delegates filed out of the chamber, discussing Jintar's presentation in hushed tones, the ambassador stood alone on the speaking platform. The holographic image of Earth still floated above him, beautiful and serene, giving no hint of the warrior species that called it home. He touched a control, and the image zoomed in on one of the human cities, showing the tiny figures of people going about their daily lives, completely unaware that their fate was being decided by beings from beyond the stars. I tried to warn them, Jintar whispered to the empty chamber. I tried. The price of arrogance. The void between stars rippled with unnatural light as the Zormak invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. 250 warships materialized in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the dark metallic sheen that had become synonymous with Dominion power across 16 conquered worlds. At the center of this armada, the flagship Eternal Conquest dominated the space around it, a massive dreadnought that stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, bristling with weapons capable of reducing planets to molten slag. Commander Croth stood on the bridge, his massive form casting shadows across the command crew as they worked at their stations. Through the viewport, he could see the distant yellow sun that humans called Sol, and somewhere in the darkness ahead lay the blue jewel of Earth. His 4 primary eyes gleamed with anticipation while his secondary eyes monitored the tactical displays that surrounded him. This would be his 17th conquest, and he expected it to be among the easiest. The Dominion war machine had never failed, and he saw no reason for that record to change today. Status report, Croth commanded, his voice a deep rumble that resonated through the bridge. Lieutenant Vex, his second in command, consulted the sensor arrays before responding. All ships have successfully translated from hyperspace, Commander. Formation is holding perfectly. Long-range scans are beginning to map the inner system. The young officer's voice carried confidence born from years of successful campaigns. He had served under Croth for 3 conquests and had learned to trust his commander's instincts completely. The main display flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional representation of the solar system. 8 major planets orbited the central star, along with countless smaller bodies in asteroid belts and the outer reaches. The third planet from the Sun glowed with the telltale signs of industrial civilization: electromagnetic emissions, heat signatures from cities, and the faint trails of spacecraft moving between orbital installations. "Magnify the third planet," Croth ordered, leaning forward with interest. Earth filled the screen, rotating slowly to reveal continents and oceans. Small orbital stations ringed the planet like a loose necklace, their designs primitive but functional. Several spacecraft were visible in transit between Earth and its moon, moving with the slow, methodical pace of chemical propulsion systems. Croth counted perhaps 30 vessels in total throughout the entire system, most of them appearing to be cargo haulers or scientific research ships. "Is this all they have?" Croth asked, unable to keep the disappointment from his voice. "Where is their defense fleet? Surely they maintain some form of military presence." Vex worked the sensor controls, scanning multiple frequencies. "Commander, I am detecting no dedicated military vessels. The ships we see appear to be civilian in nature. There are some armed satellites around the planet, but their weapons are primitive kinetic and explosive-based systems. Nothing that could threaten even our lightest frigates. If they have a military fleet, they are keeping it hidden remarkably well." Another officer called out from the communication station. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission from the planet. Audio and visual, using basic electromagnetic protocols. They appear to be attempting first contact procedures." Croth settled into his command throne, a satisfied smile crossing his features. "Put it through. Let us see what these humans have to say when faced with the might of the Dominion." The screen changed to show the interior of what appeared to be a human military command center. The walls were covered with displays and monitors, and dozens of humans worked at various stations in the background. In the foreground, a human male stood at attention, wearing a uniform that was clearly military in nature despite its primitive design. His hair was gray at the temples, and his eyes held a calm steadiness that seemed almost out of place given the situation. "This is Admiral Chen of the United Earth Defense Command," the human said in clear, measured tones. "You have entered our solar system with what appears to be a hostile fleet. We have no quarrel with your people and wish to resolve this situation peacefully. Please state your intentions." Croth laughed, the sound booming through the bridge and causing several crew members to flinch. "Admiral Chen, I am Commander Croth of the Zormak Dominion. Your solar system now belongs to us. You will surrender immediately and prepare your planet for occupation. If you comply, your deaths will be swift and your people will be treated fairly as subjects of the Dominion. If you resist, we will burn your world until nothing remains but ash and memory." Admiral Chen's expression did not change. He simply nodded slowly as if Croth had confirmed something he already suspected. "I see. Then we have nothing more to discuss diplomatically. Commander Croth, you have made a grave error today. One that you will not live to regret, but one that will be remembered across your empire for generations to come." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Croth staring at a blank screen. For a moment he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar: uncertainty. The human's complete lack of fear was unsettling. Every other species the Dominion had conquered had reacted with terror, anger, or desperate pleading. But this Admiral Chen had simply accepted the situation and made what sounded like a threat, despite being impossibly outgunned. Croth shook off the feeling and turned to his weapons officer. "Begin the bombardment. Target their orbital installations first, then select several major population centers. We will show them the price of resistance." Before the officer could comply, alarms began shrieking throughout the bridge. Red warning lights bathed everything in a crimson glow as the tactical officer shouted over the noise. "Commander, multiple contacts emerging from behind the moon. Dozens of vessels, all military configurations. They were hiding in the lunar shadow, completely powered down. Our sensors did not detect them until they activated their systems." The main display showed the new arrivals, sleek warships that looked nothing like the civilian vessels they had observed earlier. These ships moved with purpose and precision, accelerating at rates that should have been impossible for chemical propulsion. Their hulls were matte black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, and they bristled with weapons arrays that, while primitive in design, were far more numerous than expected. "How many ships?" Croth demanded, his earlier confidence beginning to waver. 73 and counting, Commander. More are emerging from concealment in the asteroid belt and the outer planets. They have been waiting for us. The tactical officer's voice held a note of grudging respect. They baited us and made us think they were defenseless. Croth's mind raced. 73 ships against his 250 should still be an easy victory, but the tactical situation had changed dramatically. These humans had shown they were capable of strategic thinking, hiding their true strength until the enemy committed. It was a clever move, but cleverness alone would not save them from superior technology and firepower. All ships, combat formation Delta, Croth ordered. Prepare to engage the enemy fleet. Show them what happens when primitive species challenge the Dominion. The Zormak fleet began to shift, heavy battleships moving to the front while carriers deployed fighter craft and frigates spread out to protect the flanks. It was a formation they had used successfully in dozens of battles, a wall of firepower that had broken every enemy they had ever faced. As they maneuvered, the human fleet continued to approach, their formation seeming almost random at first glance. Lieutenant Vex studied the tactical display with growing concern. Commander, the human ships are not following any standard attack pattern. Their movements appear chaotic, but they are maintaining perfect spacing. I cannot predict their approach vector. It does not matter, Croth replied, though he felt that strange uncertainty growing stronger. Fire when they enter range. Overwhelm them with superior firepower. The distance closed rapidly. When the human ships reached the maximum effective range of Zormak weapons, every gun in the fleet opened fire simultaneously. Plasma cannons sent streams of superheated matter across the void. Missile launchers expelled swarms of self-guided warheads. Energy beams capable of slicing through asteroids lanced toward the approaching human vessels. The combined firepower was enough to sterilize a planet, all of it focused on the relatively small human fleet. And the humans dodged. Not all of them, and not perfectly, but with a precision that defied explanation. Ships changed vector at the last possible moment, their courses shifting in ways that seemed to violate physics. Missiles found empty space where targets had been microseconds before. Energy beams carved through the darkness, missing by margins so thin they should have been impossible to calculate, let alone execute. How are they moving like that? Vex shouted over the chaos of alarms and status reports. Those acceleration profiles should tear their ships apart. Focus fire on individual targets, Croth commanded, trying to maintain control of the situation. Concentrate all weapons on the nearest vessel. They cannot dodge if we saturate the entire area. 10 Zormak battleships turned their full attention to a single human cruiser, unleashing enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The human ship twisted and rolled, evading most of the attack, but finally several plasma bolts struck home. The ship's hull glowed white-hot, and for a moment, Croth thought they had scored their first kill. Then the glow faded, revealing superficial damage but a still functional vessel. Impossible, Vex whispered. Nothing should survive a direct plasma cannon hit. Their armor should have vaporized. But there was no time to analyze this mystery because the humans were returning fire. What came from their weapons were not the expected energy beams or sophisticated missiles. Instead, they launched simple metal slugs, accelerated to tremendous velocities by what appeared to be electromagnetic rails. These primitive projectiles should have been easy to intercept or deflect with shields. They were not. The first railgun round struck a Zormak frigate amidships, punching through its shields as if they did not exist. The projectile carried so much kinetic energy that it did not simply penetrate the hull but liquefied everything in its path, exiting the far side in a spray of molten metal and vaporized crew. The frigate exploded seconds later as its reactor lost containment, adding another brief star to the battlefield. Shields are ineffective against solid projectiles at relativistic speeds, the science officer reported, his voice cracking with panic. The rounds are moving at significant fractions of light speed. At those velocities, mass becomes irrelevant. They are hitting us with the kinetic force of small nuclear weapons. The battle deteriorated rapidly into chaos. The Zormak fleet, designed to fight enemies with energy weapons and guided missiles, found their defenses useless against human tactics. The humans fought like nothing Croth had ever encountered. Their ships worked in perfect coordination, each vessel covering others, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned space into a death trap for any Zormak ship that broke formation. Worse still, the humans employed tactics that bordered on insane. When a human destroyer found itself surrounded by 3 Zormak cruisers, instead of trying to escape, it accelerated directly toward the nearest enemy. The human ship rammed the cruiser at tremendous speed, and both vessels exploded in a ball of fusion fire. But in dying, the human ship created an opening that allowed 2 more human vessels to strike at the remaining cruisers from advantageous angles. They used their own ships as weapons, Vex said in horror, watching another human vessel execute a suicide run that took out a Zormak carrier. They sacrificed themselves without hesitation. Krotha's mind reeled as he tried to process what he was seeing. The Dominion had fought many species, but none had ever shown this level of tactical flexibility combined with such ruthless determination. Every human ship seemed to operate with a single purpose: destroy the enemy at any cost. They did not retreat when damaged. They did not surrender when surrounded. They simply fought until they won or died trying. "Commander, we have lost 47 ships," the tactical officer reported. "Enemy losses stand at 19 vessels. At this rate, we will be destroyed before we can significantly damage their fleet." 47 ships. Nearly a fifth of his fleet gone in less than an hour of combat. Kroth had never lost so many ships in a single engagement. In fact, the entire Dominion had rarely suffered such losses in any of their conquest campaigns. And the humans were still coming, their remaining ships showing no signs of damage severe enough to slow them down. "All ships, execute fighting retreat pattern," Kroth ordered, the words bitter in his mouth. "Fall back to the hyperspace jump point. We will regroup and reassess." As the Zormak fleet began its withdrawal, the human ships pursued relentlessly. They did not simply chase the fleeing vessels but anticipated their movements, cutting off escape routes and forcing Dominion ships into kill zones where concentrated firepower could bring them down. It was like watching a pack of predators hunt prey that should have been far too dangerous for them, yet somehow the humans made it look effortless. A new alarm sounded on the bridge, this one even more urgent than the combat warnings. "Commander," Vex reported, his voice hollow with disbelief, "we have new contacts emerging from hyperspace. Human reinforcements, over 100 additional vessels. They are moving to cut off our retreat." Kroth stared at the tactical display in dawning horror. The humans had not committed their full strength to the initial engagement. They had been holding reserves, waiting to see how the Dominion fleet would respond. And now those reserves were positioning themselves to finish what the first wave had started. The trap was closing and the mighty Zormak Dominion fleet was caught inside. "How did they know?" Kroth whispered. "How did they know where we would retreat? How did they know our tactics?" "Because they studied us, Commander," Vex replied quietly, his voice filled with terrible understanding. "Ambassador Gentar tried to warn us. Humans study war. They learn from every battle, every enemy. They probably observed our previous conquests, analyzed our strategies, identified our patterns. They knew exactly what we would do because we have always done it the same way. We have become predictable." The next hour was a nightmare of desperate combat and futile attempts at escape. The human fleet showed no mercy, systematically hunting down and destroying Zormak vessels with brutal efficiency. They targeted engines to prevent escape, then weapons to prevent retaliation, and finally life support systems to ensure no survivors. It was methodical, calculated destruction that spoke of long experience in warfare. Krotha's flagship took hit after hit, its shields failing, its armor buckling, its systems dying one by one. Around him, his crew worked frantically to keep the ship operational, but it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. Through the viewport, he could see the burning wrecks of his once mighty fleet, hundreds of his warriors dead or dying in the cold vacuum of space. "Commander, we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet," the communications officer reported. "Admiral Chen wishes to speak with you." "Put it through," Kroth said, his voice defeated. Admiral Chen appeared on the screen again, but this time he was standing on what appeared to be the bridge of a human warship. Behind him, crew members worked efficiently at their stations, and through the windows Kroth could see the stars and the burning remains of his fleet. The Admiral's expression was not triumphant or cruel. Instead, he looked tired and sad, like someone who had done a terrible but necessary thing. "Commander Kroth," Chen said quietly, "you were warned. Ambassador Gentar tried to tell your people what would happen if you attacked us. But you did not listen. You saw our primitive technology and assumed we would be easy prey. You made the fatal mistake of confusing technological advancement with combat effectiveness." Kroth said nothing, his eyes fixed on the human who had destroyed his fleet and his career in a single afternoon. Chen continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. "Humans have been fighting wars for 5,000 years, Commander. We have faced every type of enemy you can imagine. Enemies with better weapons, enemies with greater numbers, enemies with superior positions. And we have learned that victory does not come from having the best technology. It comes from understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves." The Admiral gestured to something off-screen, and the display split to show tactical recordings of the battle. "We studied your species for months before you arrived. We watched recordings of your previous conquests. We analyzed your tactics, your formations, your standard responses to different situations. We identified your strengths and your weaknesses. And then we designed a battle plan specifically to exploit everything we learned. Croth watched in numb horror as the recordings showed human analysts breaking down Zormak combat doctrines, identifying patterns, predicting responses with uncanny accuracy. Every move his fleet had made during the battle had been anticipated, prepared for, and countered before it even happened. The humans had not simply defeated the Dominion. They had dissected them like a laboratory specimen. "You fought bravely, Commander," Chin continued. "Your warriors showed courage and discipline. But courage and discipline are not enough when your enemy knows what you will do before you do it. This is what Ambassador Jintar was trying to tell you. Humans do not just fight wars. We study them, analyze them, perfect them. It is what we have always done, and it is what we will continue to do." The connection began to break up as another explosion rocked the Eternal Conquest. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the lights flickered as power systems failed throughout the ship. Croth gripped the arms of his command throne, his body battered and broken, his pride shattered beyond repair. "I am transmitting the coordinates for the sole hyperspace jump point you can still reach," Chin said, his image flickering but his voice clear. "Take what remains of your fleet and leave our system. Go back to your people and tell them what happened here. Tell them that Earth is not to be touched. Tell them that humans defend what is theirs with everything we have, and we will pursue any aggressor to the ends of the galaxy if necessary." The transmission ended, leaving Croth alone with the ruins of his invasion force. Of the 250 ships he had brought to Earth, only 43 remained functional enough to make the jump to hyperspace. 207 vessels destroyed or crippled, tens of thousands of warriors dead, and for what? He had learned the same lesson that countless humans had learned over their long, bloody history. Underestimating your enemy is the surest path to defeat. "Navigator," Croth said weakly, "set course for home. Engineering, direct all remaining power to the hyperdrive. Communications, send a message to the Dominion High Command. Tell them we have failed. Tell them Earth is defended by warriors unlike any we have ever faced. Tell them that Ambassador Jintar was right about everything." The shattered remnants of the Zormak fleet limped toward the jump point, pursued by human vessels that herded them like dogs guiding sheep. Only when the last Dominion ship had jumped to hyperspace did the human fleet cease fire. They did not pursue beyond their solar system. They had made their point clearly enough. Earth was not defenseless and humans were not prey. Back at the Galactic Assembly, Ambassador Jintar stood once again at the central speaking platform, but this time, every seat in the chamber was filled. Representatives who had dismissed his warnings now listened with rapt attention as he described the battle that had taken place at Earth. The holographic displays showed tactical recordings that the humans had willingly shared, demonstrating their capabilities to anyone who cared to watch. "As you can see," Jintar said, his voice carrying none of the desperation it had held during his previous address, "the humans are precisely what I warned they would be. Formidable warriors who have spent millennia learning how to win against superior foes. Commander Croth ignored my warning, and it cost him his fleet and thousands of lives." The chamber was absolutely silent. Even the most aggressive species represented in the assembly looked sobered by what they had witnessed. The Zormak Dominion, whose military might had been unquestioned for generations, had been decisively defeated by a species that had not even mastered faster-than-light travel until recently. "The question before us now," Jintar continued, "is how we proceed. Humans have proven they can defend themselves, but they have also shown restraint. They did not pursue the Dominion fleet beyond their borders. They did not demand tribute or territory. They simply defended their home and sent a clear message. This suggests they are capable of diplomacy and reason, despite their martial prowess." Counselor Thex raised a tentacle, her earlier cheerfulness completely gone. "What do you recommend, Ambassador? How should the Assembly approach these humans?" Jintar's skin rippled with patterns that conveyed both caution and hope. "We approach them with respect. We acknowledge their strength while offering friendship. We invite them to join the galactic community as equals, not as subjects or primitives to be guided. And most importantly, we make it clear that the Dominion's actions were not sanctioned by this body and do not represent how civilized species conduct first contact." A new voice spoke from the back of the chamber. Commander Croth, his body bandaged and his armor scorched, stood shakily in the observer's gallery. He had come directly from the medical facilities where his most severe injuries had been treated, and he looked like a broken shadow of the proud warrior who had dismissed Jintar's warnings just weeks ago. "The ambassador is correct," Croth said, his voice hoarse but clear. "I ignored his wisdom and paid a terrible price. Humans are not primitive. They are not weak. They are warriors of the highest caliber, and they deserve our respect. Anyone who attacks them will face the same fate as my fleet. This I swear before the assembly." The silence that followed was profound. The commander of the Dominion's greatest fleet, a warrior who had never known defeat before today, had publicly acknowledged human superiority in warfare. It was a statement that would echo through the galaxy, carried by traders and diplomats to every civilized world. 6 months after the battle, Ambassador Gentar led a diplomatic delegation to Earth, this time with full authorization from the Galactic Assembly. The humans welcomed them warmly and negotiations proceeded smoothly. Earth was offered full membership in the Assembly with all the rights and privileges that entailed. In return, humans agreed to share their unique perspectives on conflict resolution and strategic thinking with other species. Admiral Chin stood with Gentar on a balcony overlooking one of Earth's great cities, watching the evening lights begin to twinkle on as the sun set. "You tried to warn them," Chin said quietly. "We know you did. Humanity appreciates that you stood alone in our defense when others saw only opportunity." Gentar's skin rippled with pleased patterns. "I only spoke the truth as I saw it, Admiral. I am grateful that the truth, painful as it was for some to learn, has led to this peaceful outcome." Chin nodded, looking out at the city where millions of humans lived their lives, completely unaware of how close they had come to a war that might have consumed the galaxy. "We have a saying on Earth, Ambassador, peace through strength. We do not seek war, but we prepare for it constantly, hoping our very readiness will make it unnecessary." Today that philosophy proved its worth. As the two stood together, representatives of their respective peoples and newly forged friendship, a new chapter began in galactic history. Humanity had announced its presence not with words or gifts, but with an undeniable demonstration of capability. The galaxy had learned its lesson, and the lesson was simple. Never underestimate humans, for they have spent 5,000 years learning how to win wars against impossible odds. And they never, ever forget.